The room seemed to shrink as I asked my wife, "What's your connection to David?" "He's my patient." Eleanor froze, her wineglass trembling in her hand, the crimson liquid catching the dim light of our dining room chandelier like a warning. Her eyes, usually warm and steady, darted to the floor, then back to me, wide with something I couldn't name. Fear, guilt, or both. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading as I realized I'd stumbled into something I wasn't ready to face. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and tried to replay the moment in my head. I'd come home from the hospital, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, my scrub still faintly scented with antiseptic. Eleanor had been quieter than usual, stirring the pasta sauce with a distracted rhythm, her phone buzzing on the counter every few minutes. When I mentioned David, casually, I thought just a passing comment about his latest session, she'd gone still. Not just still, petrified. Her reaction was a splinter under my skin, sharp and impossible to ignore. "Ellie," I said, my voice low, almost pleading. "What's going on?" My heart pounded. Each beat a question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. I'd known her for 10 years, married for 7, and I could count on one hand the times I'd seen her like this, cornered, exposed. She set the glass down, too carefully, her fingers lingering on the stem as if grounding herself. "It's nothing," she said, but her voice cracked, a hairline fracture in her usual confidence. I know him. From work." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. They were glassy, searching mine for a reaction, as if she could gauge how much I suspected. "From work," I echoed, my tone sharper than I intended. Eleanor worked in marketing, crafting campaigns for a tech startup. David was a software engineer, a patient I'd been seeing for months, wrestling with anxiety and a failing marriage. The overlap was plausible, but her hesitation wasn't. I leaned forward, my elbows pressing into the table, the cool wood grounding me against the rising tide of dread. "How well do you know him?" She swallowed, her throat bobbing, and turned toward the kitchen, busying herself with the dishes. "Not well," she said, her back to me, her words clipped. "Just professionally. We collaborated on a project last year." The clatter of plates filled the pause, but it couldn't drown out the questions screaming in my head. Why hadn't she mentioned him before? Why did her face betray her now? I wanted to believe her. God, I did. Eleanor was my anchor, the one who laughed at my terrible puns, who stayed up with me during late-night charting, her head on my shoulder as we shared a bottle of cheap wine. But the air in the room felt wrong, heavy with unspoken truths. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood, and followed her to the kitchen. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows across her face. She looked older, tired, her freckles stark against her pale skin. "Ellie, look at me," I said, softer now, though my hands trembled at my sides. She turned, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment before dropping again. "If it's nothing, why are you acting like this?" My voice wavered, caught between anger and desperation. I wanted her to laugh it off, to call me paranoid, to pull me into her arms and make this moment dissolve. But she didn't. She just stood there, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "I'm not acting like anything," she snapped, but the defensiveness in her tone was a red flag, waving in the storm brewing between us. "You're the one making a big deal out of nothing." She pushed past me, her shoulder brushing mine, and I caught the faint scent of her lavender perfume, now tinged with something sour like fear. I followed her to the living room, where she sank onto the couch, pulling a throw blanket over her lap as if it could shield her from my questions. The room was too quiet, the ticking of the wall clock a metronome to my racing thoughts. I sat across from her, on the edge of the armchair, my hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. "David told me something today," I said, testing the waters, watching her face for cracks. "He hadn't, not really, but I needed to see her reaction. He mentioned a woman he's been seeing, someone he works with." Her breath hitched, a small, sharp sound that cut through the silence. Her fingers tightened around the blanket, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then she straightened, her jaw set, and met my gaze with a defiance I hadn't expected. "And you think it's me?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. You think I'm cheating on you with your patient? The word cheating hit like a punch, raw and real, making the possibility concrete. I hadn't said it out loud, hadn't even let myself think it fully, but there it was hanging between us. My throat burned, and I looked away, focusing on the framed photo on the mantel. Us, laughing on a beach last summer, her hair tangled in the wind, my arm around her waist. That version of us felt like a ghost now, fading with every second of her silence. I don't know what to think, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You're not telling me everything, Ellie. I can feel it. My chest ached, a hollow pain that spread to my limbs, making them heavy. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I was terrified of what they might be. What if she loved him? What if the life we'd built was a lie? She stood abruptly, the blanket falling to the floor, and paced to the window. The city lights glittered outside, indifferent to the fracture in our home. You're wrong, she said, but her voice was unsteady, and she wouldn't look at me. It's not what you think. She ran a hand through her hair, tugging at the roots, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. Then tell me what it is, I said, standing now, my voice rising despite myself. Because right now it looks like you're hiding something. And it's killing me. My hands were fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. The room felt too small, the walls closing in as the truth loomed closer, sharp and inevitable. She turned, her eyes brimming with tears, and for a moment, I thought she'd break, that she'd confess everything. But then her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms, a barrier between us. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice barely audible. I need space. She grabbed her coat from the hook by the door and walked out, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot. I stood frozen, staring at the empty space where she'd been, my mind reeling. The apartment felt hollow without her, the silence deafening. I sank onto the couch, her scent lingering on the cushions, and buried my face in my hands. My thoughts spiraled. Every late night at work, every unanswered text, every time she'd seemed distracted. Had I missed the signs? Or had I seen them and chosen to ignore them? Too afraid to face the truth? Hours passed, the clock ticking toward midnight, and still she didn't return. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through David's file on the hospital portal, searching for anything that might connect him to Eleanor. His address, his workplace, his emergency contacts. Nothing stood out, but the unease gnawed at me. I remembered his sessions, the way he'd talked about his failing marriage, his guilt over complicating things. Had he been talking about her? When the door finally opened, it was nearly 2 a.m. Eleanor stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't look surprised to see me awake waiting. She set her keys down, the sound too loud in the quiet, and sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap. I'm not cheating, she said, her voice steady now, but heavy with something else, resignation maybe. But I haven't been honest. My heart stopped, the world narrowing to her words. David and we got close. Too close. It wasn't physical, but it was emotional. I didn't know how to stop it. The confession hit like a slow poison, seeping into every corner of my being. Not physical, but emotional. Was that better or worse? I couldn't decide. My throat tightened, and I struggled to speak. Why didn't you tell me? I managed, my voice raw. Why did you let it get this far? I didn't mean to, she said, tears spilling now, her voice breaking. I was lonely. You're always at the hospital, and I needed someone to talk to. He was there. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back, the betrayal too fresh, too sharp. I stood, pacing to the window, staring at the city that didn't care about us. You should have talked to me, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. I'm your husband, Ellie. Not him. The words felt inadequate, too small for the pain tearing through me. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. Sorry wasn't enough, but it was all we had. I turned to face her, and in her eyes I saw not just guilt, but love, fractured, flawed, but still there. And that was the twist that broke me. The realization that I still loved her too, even now, even after this. But trust, once shattered, doesn't mend easily. As I looked at her, I wondered if we could ever find our way back. Or if the fracture was too deep, a wound that would never heal.